On today's show, biggest questions and predictions for the post-All-Star break Houston Rockets as they head into the final stretch of this NBA season. What will the starting lineup ultimately be? Can the defense recover? How many wins will this team wind up with, and where will they place in the Western Conference seeding? It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. I want to know what your biggest questions are facing this Houston Rockets team going into the final stretch of the NBA season. And I also want to know your predictions. What's the final record, the win-loss record, and then where will the Rockets end up in the Western Conference standings? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Also, subscribe to our daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. A lot to get into on today's show. We're going to get into some of the biggest questions facing this Rockets squad as they go into the final stretch of the NBA season. What will the starting lineup ultimately be with everybody's healthy? Can the defense recover and get back to where it was earlier this season? What version of post-All-Star break Jalen Green do we get this year? Can Alperen Sengun's efficiency recover? And ultimately, where does this team end up? What's the win-loss record? Where do they place in the Western Conference standings? And if we have a little bit of time, how the San Antonio Spurs shutting down Victor Wembanyama is actually bad for the Houston Rockets. A lot to get to. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. All right, so the first big question here that's been looming on everybody's minds is, what is the starting lineup going to be for this Rockets team when everybody is healthy? As it currently stands ahead of the Rockets T-Wolves game on national TV with an 8:30 p.m. local tip-off, Fred VanVleet is listed as out on the injury report, and Jabari Smith Jr. is not on the Rockets injury report. And when Jabari was asked at Rockets practice on Thursday afternoon whether he cared about, coming off the bench or starting or what have you, he basically just boiled it down to, I really don't care. I just want to get back out there and play. And that's the right mentality to have. Now, because Fred VanVleet is going to be missing this game against the Wolves, my expectation for the starting lineup is probably going to be Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Amin Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., Alperen Sengun. Maybe Udoka decides to bring Jabari back off the bench because it's his first game back and he elects to go with like an Aaron Holiday type in the starting lineup. But I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't just throw Jabari right into the deep end and just get him back out there, especially in a game where he's already missing one of his other starters. Might as well get your other starter back in the mix. The real question will be, first off, how many more games is Fred VanVleet going to miss? He was supposed to be a kind of a game time decision for the Wolves game, and then they wound up ruling him out ahead of time on the injury report, so I guess something must have changed. How many more games is Fred ultimately going to miss? And once Fred does return, what does that starting lineup ultimately look like? That's been the burning question here, is do the Rockets go back to the starting lineup that they experienced so much success with in the early season with Jabari in place of Amin Thompson? Do they keep Amin Thompson in the starting lineup and see if they can offset some of the woes that they experienced here earlier in February by having Jabari Smith Jr. checking off the bench? Even though I think it's probably the best version of the Rockets starting lineup, they're not going to bench Dillon Brooks. I think the most likely outcome at this point is actually that they just move Amin Thompson back to the bench, reinsert Jabari in the starting lineup, and that might not be how they do things right from the jump. Maybe they do bring Jabari off the bench for a couple games, but I do think that's probably the direction that I would expect Ime Udoka to ultimately go. The other alternative, and I know I've suggested this here on the show before, but I could also see a world where they kind of soft bench Dillon Brooks a little bit, where you bring Jabari Smith Jr. off the bench and he's the first sub in the game for Dillon Brooks around the 8-minute mark, 7-minute mark of the first quarter. Like you get a short little 5-minute run for DB. And then you come in with Jabari Smith Jr. so you can get as much time of Amin, Jabari, and Sengun, that 3-man front court, your youthful front court, to see kind of what those reps ultimately look like. That would be my ideal best case scenario, because at this point, I don't think Ime Udoka is going to bench Dillon Brooks. And Amin Thompson has an immense amount of value in that starting lineup. We've seen the Rockets kind of taper off a little bit, though, because they haven't had the same defensive identity since losing Jabari Smith Jr. and also subsequently losing Fred VanVleet. So maybe Ime ultimately decides to lean further on the defensive side of things and reinserting Jabari Smith Jr. in the starting lineup because of his size, his rebounding, his length, his positional versatility. There's just a lot of things that Jabari brings to the table on the defensive side that Amin Thompson still brings a lot of great things to the table defensively. He's a great point of attack defender. He's easily the best defender on the roster. But positionally, with some combo of Amin or DB playing that 3-4 spot, it leaves the Rockets undersized at basically every position on the floor. They have struggled to be as imposing on the boards without Jabari Smith Jr. in there, especially closing out defensive possessions strong. So I don't know. I could really see it going a variety of, a couple different ways, but that's at least the prediction for now, is that Jabari is going to come off the bench for the first couple games and hopefully soft launch. That's my ideal prediction. I'm sticking with that one. That's the one that I hope happens. But I want to know, what do you think happens with the starting lineup once Fred VanVleet is back and healthy? It might be as soon as the Rockets' very next game, Saturday night against the Utah Jazz. Maybe that's the one that they want to bring Fred back for. Ultimately, we will see. Coming up, want to get into some of the other big questions facing this Rockets team. Can the defense recover? What version of post-All-Star break Jaylen Green do we get this season? What about Alperen Sengun's efficiency? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. Look, it's really simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 24-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off and order up to $10 off the next day from noon till midnight. Here are a few ways you can take advantage of this awesome deal. They've got their game day feast, late night cravings, lunch on the go, or maybe even just fueling your watch party for the very next game. So sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save when any player scores 50 or more in a game. Dash Pass members get 50% off and order the very next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, my next big question for this Rockets team is, can the defense ultimately recover? Can this Rockets team actually get back to playing a version of the defense that they were playing earlier this season when they were trailing only the OKC Thunder as far as just straight up defensive rating in the NBA? And they were literally one of the top two defenses across the association. I have some reservations, and I'm still concerned about the identity of this team and this whole, we've got to outwork you, out hustle you, out physical you every game, every possession, or we don't have the margin for error that we normally do. I still really wonder if there's diminishing returns on that identity, if this team can still tap into some of the energy that they had earlier this season when legs were fresh, when, injuries weren't racking up, when guys didn't have bumps, bruises, scrapes, cuts, whatever throughout the season. And so that's going to be my kind of big thing. Now, I do believe that because of the injuries that this roster has sustained, getting back key pieces like Jabari, who was so integral to this Rockets defense. There's a reason the defense plummeted in January and continued to trend downward even worse once Fred VanVleet came out of the lineup, because those two guys are really important to the fabric of the Rockets defense and their ultimately their identity as a whole. So there's a part of me that really believes this team has a chance to get back to the defense they were playing earlier this season. And I think that's probably easier if you do reinsert Jabari Smith Jr. into the starting lineup and just essentially go back to replicating what worked so well earlier in the year with the Terror twins coming off the bench, Amin and Tari and all that stuff. Just go back to the original starting lineup. I think that's a possibility, but I'm also really curious to see what it's going to look like if players are ultimately too gassed down the stretch to maintain that level of intensity on a night-to-night basis, on a quarter-to-quarter, minute-to-minute basis in order to regain the defensive effectiveness from earlier this season. So that's a big one for me. Also, what version of post-All-Star break Jaylen Green do we get this year? Every season of Jaylen Green's NBA career, he has performed much better in the quote-unquote second half of the season. Side note, I hate that we call it the second half of the season. It's like the final 1/3 stretch of the season. It's not even half the games. So anyways, post-All-Star break Jaylen Green has always performed really, really well. And so far this season, despite some of the rough start, the big time slump in November, kind of across the board right now, he is either tied or posting kind of career best. He's hovering at his career best true shooting percentage right now, 54.7%. Ideally, you'd like to see that number elevate as the season progresses, maybe finishing somewhere around 56% true shooting for the season would be, I think, a really positive step in the right direction for Jaylen Green. Anything north of 56% TS at this stage would be really good for Jaylen. And then the three-point shooting, it's stabilized right now at 35%. If he can finish the year on a really, really strong run like he did last season, if he can have another March Jaylen Green stretch, then it's hard to see a world where he doesn't finish the year shooting, 36 or 36.5% from three. And I think the important thing here with Jaylen, because it's really easy to identify like a 5-game or a 7-game or a 10-game stretch of Jaylen's career where he's really struggling, or vice versa, where you can identify a 5 or 7 or 10-game sample where he looks really, really good and unstoppable. The biggest thing for Jaylen this year has been, can you eliminate some of the dangerously low lows? And I think to this point, he's done a pretty good job of that. And can you establish to where the consistency across the board, when you evaluate a whole season's body of work, what does it ultimately look like? And I think that so far, where Jaylen is at right now, 21 points per game, 54.7% true shooting. You'd like that number, again, to be a little bit higher, but it's not the absolute end of the world. If he can finish the season as a 21, 22 point per game scorer, and then 56 or so true shooting percentage on a top 4 team in the Western Conference, I think that would be considered a pretty wildly successful year, considering some of the expectations that were placed on Jaylen's shoulders coming into his 4th career NBA season. So this team will only go so far as Jaylen Green ultimately takes them, especially the remainder of this regular season, but also this postseason, right? The Rockets need the best version of Jaylen Green to be the best version of themselves. He is kind of the ceiling of this Rockets team. Sengun has room to improve and room to play better. Absolutely. Talk about him in a moment. But Sengun's floor is a lot higher at this point than it feels like Jaylen's floor is. So as long as Jaylen's playing up to that potential, up to that level that we know that he's capable of playing at, just need to see it on a truly consistent basis, especially rounding out the season and across any potential 7-game series down the line for the Rockets. That's going to be the biggest kind of X factor or win factor for this Rockets team. What version of Jaylen Green do they get? Not just like, on a night-to-night, game-to-game basis to close out this year and in any potential playoff series. And then the other big guy here, Alperen Sengun. For Alp, he still made it as an all-star this year. He did. And that was exciting and is awesome and is a great honor and privilege for Alp. But the one thing that's been holding him back all season long, despite the massive step forward that he's taken defensively, yet again, taking a huge step forward on that end of the floor, his physicality, his rebounding, career numbers, posting career highs across the board, but his efficiency took that massive hit, right? And we've kind of chalked it up to, okay, he added a ton of upper body strength, and that probably really messed with his touch. And, it's been, a really difficult road for him to kind of trying to reestablish some of those, that soft touch around the rim, or even just his decisiveness, his decision-making at times, learning how to anticipate and deal with double teams, triple teams throughout the season, kind of still dealing with some of the adverse side effects of the spacing issues that the Rockets offense has at times with some of the lineups that they have to throw out there or have had to throw out there, like where you have Sengun and Amin Thompson and Jayshawn Tate and, multiple non-shooting lineups out there that allow teams to really pack the paint and make life even harder for Alp. the big thing for me is, is he going to be able to get to a place where the efficiency can get back to what it was a couple seasons ago? Because right now the TS is all the way down at 54%. That's really abysmal for a big man. Last year he was at 58.5%. The year before that, so his second year in the NBA, he was just a hair under 60% TS. If he were having numbers like that, like if his true shooting percentage was just up at 58.5 instead of 54%, we're talking about Alperen Sengun having a very legitimate, and honestly probably the most compelling case to be third team All-NBA behind, I'm guessing, if I had to really guess, right, I mean, we're going Nikola Jokic, Evan Mobley for the Cleveland Cavaliers, maybe Karl-Anthony Towns for the Knicks. Chet missed too much time this season. AD has missed a ton of time this season. Maybe Gobert is mixed into that mix. Domantas Sabonis. Like, there's a bunch of bigs out there. Bam Adebayo for the Miami Heat, although he's having a down year, so I guess not. I reel off all these names because if Alp's numbers were better, then he'd be in the All-NBA conversation. When you look at his averages, he's at 18.8 points per contest right now, which is lower than what he was doing last year. He did 21 a game last year. If he was doing anywhere from 21 to 22 points a game on a top 4 seed, top 3 seed, with an elevated defense, with his elevated defense in particular, on much better efficiency, then one, he wouldn't have been as much of a controversial all-star pick as unfortunately he was, with a lot of people thinking that Domantas Sabonis got snubbed from the all-star team. However, again, team record is important in this negotiation. Sabonis and the Kings were really struggling this year, whereas Sengun and the Rockets were at the top of the Western Conference for most of the first 2/3 of the season going into the All-Star break. That's the big one, is can Alp figure that part of his game out? Can he get back to the touch and the consistency around the rim that he had previously? And to a lesser degree, what does it look like after, how will he continue to adjust to the defensive attention, the double teams, the triple teams? Because I feel like that's been an ongoing battle this season for Alp, figuring out how to make the right decisions when he gets doubled, when he gets tripled, who to kick out passes to, how not, trying not to hold on to the ball too long or make your moves a little bit too predictable and spinning into a double team or getting the ball stripped on drives, like little things like that, where because the defense has been so loaded up on Alp for most of the season, that it's not that teams have figured out Alp, it's just that great players get schemed against constantly, and then the great players find a way to continue to beat or put too much pressure on opposing defenses to still take advantage of them. Alp can still do that. Alp puts tons of pressure on opposing defenses. They have to game plan for him every single night. There's a reason he's such a huge part of what this Rockets team does and why they struggle when he's not in the lineup or even on the floor at times. So does Ime have some answers for how to get Alp some easier looks, how to maybe prevent or take advantage of some of those double and triple team opportunities a little bit more in the latter chunk of this season? So those are some of my other big questions for this squad. Coming up, probably the biggest question of all, although it's going to be more of a prediction style here, is where do the Rockets end up standings-wise in the Western Conference? What is going to be their final win-loss record, and how the Victor Wembanyama season-ending blood clot actually hurts the Houston Rockets? We're going to get to that in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Using FanDuel's live betting feature is so easy because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. Never feel like you missed your chance to get in on the action. The app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, let's get into record predictions and standing predictions for this Houston Rockets team as they're going into their final stretch of the NBA season. Now, one thing, shout out to Matt Moore, who HP Basketball on Twitter, who has a very love-hate relationship with Rockets fans, but each year he calculates the magic numbers for teams across the Eastern and Western Conference standings, which the magic number is essentially the number of wins combined with losses that you need for a particular outcome for your team's regular season standings. So right now for the Houston Rockets, their magic number, which again is a combination of the number of wins your team needs plus losses from other teams competing for said spot, in order to garner these three different outcomes. So the magic number for a play-in spot for the Rockets is 21. So some combination of 21, be it wins or opposing team losses, gets the Rockets a guaranteed play-in spot. 24 is the magic number for a playoff spot guaranteed, as in top 6. So one of the top 6 seeds in the Western Conference. And then 29 is the magic number for a top 4 seed and home court advantage in the first round. So keep those numbers in mind as we're progressing throughout the regular season. I will say there's a few different tiebreakers that are relevant here for the Rockets. They have the tiebreaker against the Memphis Grizzlies. They lead the Nuggets 1-0 with 2 games left to play. They're leading the Lakers 1-0 as well with 2 games left to play. So 2 potentially important tiebreakers to be had there, but the Rockets are already up 1-0. So if they just win one of those 2 remaining matchups each with the Nuggets and Lakers, they will clinch the tiebreakers there, which could be incredibly relevant as the season winds down. They do have the tiebreaker 3-0 over the Clippers with 1 game left to play there, so no impact as far as that game is concerned from a tiebreaker perspective. They're trailing the Wolves 1-2 with this very next game happening Friday night, so they can only split the season series with the Wolves. They're leading the Mavericks 2-1 with 1 game left to play, and they've clinched the split with the Mavericks because I think of division or conference standing or something like that. It's a different tiebreaker there. They've lost the tiebreaker to the Kings. They're 0-2 with 1 game left to play, and they've lost the tiebreaker against the Warriors. They're 1-3 against the Warriors this season. They've got 1 game left to play, and the reason they played 5 games is because of that quarterfinals match for the in-season tournament, which was the 5th game on the schedule, essentially, for the Rockets Warriors this season. So a couple of those tiebreakers, I think, are going to come into effect. Again, the Nuggets, the Lakers tiebreakers, those are still up for grabs, and those could be really huge. But the fact that they already own the Clippers and the Grizzlies tiebreakers are really beneficial. Now, the Rockets also, at this stage of the schedule, have the 21st most difficult schedule remaining in the NBA, or otherwise the 9th easiest schedule, whatever. So that bodes well for the Rockets. The fact that they're not going to be dealing with nearly as difficult of a schedule as they had for the first 2/3 of the season. Kind of winding this thing down, the Rockets are in a really good spot compared to some of their peers, because the Lakers have the most difficult strength of schedule remaining, followed by the Phoenix Suns, followed by the Denver Nuggets, then the Sacramento Kings, then the LA Clippers, then the Memphis Grizzlies at 6th. So they're like literally 6 Western Conference teams all stacked up there at the top, from most difficult to 6th most difficult strength of schedule. So that's a really great spot for the Rockets to be in. And ultimately, it leads me to think, even though I could probably be a little bit more bullish about this outcome, I think the Rockets are going to go 14-13 the rest of the way. And I don't think that's, playing out the season at 500 basketball or just above 500 basketball and finishing off the year at 48-34 is still well above the expectations that we had for this team coming in. And I really do think, there's a part of me that wanted to be more bullish and say, okay, they go 15-12 or 16-11 or whatever, break that 50-win threshold. But I also really think that the rest of the Western Conference, it's so tight in the West right now. And one of my predictions coming into the season was I thought there was only going to be one team that ultimately cracked 50 wins. And the way that I've got it actually slotted up right now, I think I'm going to stick to that prediction. I think it's going to be the Thunder clearly is the number 1 seed. The Grizzlies will be the number 2 seed, and I think they only break 49 wins. So I think the Grizzlies are going to finish at 49 wins. Rockets will have 48 wins, 48 and 34, and they'll be the 3rd seed. And then to finish off the rest of the standings in the West, you'll have the Nuggets at the 4th seed, Wolves at the 5th seed, Clippers as the 6th seed, Mavs as the 7th seed, Warriors as the 8th seed, Lakers and Kings rounding out the West as the 9th and 10th seeds. I'm fully expecting the Lakers to plummet in the standings. They do not look like a great basketball team right now. Luka is trying to play himself into shape. They don't have a really functional roster. LeBron can only do so much at 40 years of age. They're just going to have to hit. I feel like they're going to probably really struggle for these next 10 games or so right out of the break. And it wouldn't surprise me to see a version of this Lakers team where they just shut things down, shut down Luka, shut down LeBron, focus on their rest, health, and rehabilitation, keeping them fresh for next season when they actually have a legitimate chance to compete with each other. Kings, I don't imagine doing much of anything. I think the Warriors are going to jump up the standings just a little bit with their new big three with Jimmy Butler. Mavs have actually played some pretty decent basketball without Luka for chunks of the year. And, TBD on whether or not they get Anthony Davis back or what he's like when he does get back. But I think the Mavs will slot in at that 7th slot. Clippers, I think, will fade a little bit. They've got a tough strength of schedule. I think the Wolves will climb a little bit. Wolves' strength of schedule is... what was it? I think it was like middle of the pack. Minnesota. No, it's actually easier than the Rockets schedule. It's the 5th easiest schedule remaining in the NBA. So Wolves, I think, will kind of climb up the standings a little bit for that reason. Nuggets, I think, are going to run out of steam. They're just one of those teams that feels like, they've been there, done that. They've proven themselves. Jokic is having yet another insane MVP caliber season. And if it wasn't for SGA and the Thunder being so much further ahead of them, as far as win-loss record and standings and whatever, I think it would be Jokic's MVP to lose. But I think it feels like SGA's year to win MVP. Honestly, that's my personal opinion. Which, if that's the outcome there, that's my official playoff seeding prediction. That would slot the Rockets for a first-round series with the Clippers, 3rd seed, 6th seed. And that would be a ton of fun. I think that's one of my ideal first round matchups, just from a narrative perspective, from a storyline perspective. It'd be really exciting for this team to go up against James Harden as they're kind of ushering in the first era of playoff basketball since he was on the team. So I think it's kind of poetic in that nature, but it'd also be a really fun series. The Rockets Clippers games have been pretty fun to this point. And I think the Rockets actually match up pretty well with the Clippers at the end of the day. They're not one of the teams that like super duper scares me in the Western Conference standings. So that, and then the final thing as it concerns the Western Conference standings and everything, the final topic that I wanted to just quickly touch on here is Victor Wembanyama being shut down for the remainder of the season with a blood clot in his shoulder. So apparently he was dealing with some fatigue and some tiredness and whatever going into All-Star break. And the medical staff was just kind of like, all right, we'll see how you feel. He still dealt with it during All-Star weekend. So then they ran a bunch of tests. And so now he's shut down. And correct me if I'm wrong. So one of the old heads are going to have to chime in here. But I think somebody was sharing on social media that this is something like a similar situation happened with Dream in his career where he had the blood clot thing. And it was a weird one-off. And then he was fine after that. So please fact check me if I'm wrong on that. I could have sworn I remembered reading that somewhere. So from a sheer human perspective, I really do hope this isn't anything that's going to inhibit Wemby's career. I hope he's going to be okay. The league is better when there's good rivalries and Wemby versus Amin Thompson and this Rockets team, Wemby versus Sengun for years to come. Rockets Spurs rivalry is always going to be really, really fun. So from that perspective, I do hope Wemby's okay, but he's out for the rest of the season. And that actually hurts the Rockets this season because it really felt like the Spurs were looking to make a pretty significant push to try and garner a play-in spot at the back end of the Western Conference, that 9th, 10th spot in the West. And what that also meant was they were right on the heels. In fact, they right now are tied up in the loss column with the Phoenix Suns. And the way that hurts the Rockets ultimately is you wanted the Suns to not only be removed from the play-in discussion period, because that would more than likely lead to the end of this iteration of the Phoenix Suns. They trade KD this summer, all that stuff. But it also helps with the draft positioning of that pick swap that the Rockets own the rights to in the 2025 draft coming up right around the corner. You want the Suns to lose as many games as possible. You want the Spurs to push them further down the standings. And maybe they're still able to do that. De'Aaron Fox is still a really great, incredibly talented singular player, and he might be able to drag the Spurs to a few more wins here and there, and maybe they do still box out the Phoenix Suns and push them one peg further down the Western Conference standings. Which, as a weird aside, the Trailblazers are only 4 losses back of the Suns as well. Like, the Suns have played some really bad basketball this year. The fact that the Blazers are like sneaking up on where the Suns are standing wise, that would be best case scenarios. Spurs leapfrog the Suns, and then somehow the Blazers rack up a few more wins, and the Suns like shut down Booker and KD and Beal, and they just tank the rest of the season for God knows what reason. That would be some really exciting stuff there. That'd be some 4D chess if the Suns would tank the rest of the season, increase the value of the 2025 pick swap so that they can then barter it in a trade with the Rockets when the Rockets want to trade Cooper Flag and whoever else for like KD and Devin Booker and all that stuff this offseason. I'm going super off my rocker here with a crazy tinfoil hat kind of conspiracy. But no, it sucks because it sucks from the human element. Like, hope Wemby's okay. Don't besmirch me for thinking that injuries just suck, period. But hopefully the Spurs are still able to overtake the Phoenix Suns, push that pick a little bit further down in the standings. In fact, that's actually a really good time. We haven't done it all season long because, not a tanking team anymore, but let's go ahead and sim this lottery because right now the Phoenix Suns pick is sitting at 12th best lottery odds. So let's go ahead and sim this lottery and see what happens. Oh, man. All right. It stayed at 12. Sorry, guys. I did my best. Let's spin it a couple more times. Phoenix. Come on, Phoenix. Come on, Phoenix. Okay, I've clicked this like 8 times, and I still haven't got anything. Still no jump. Oh, it jumped up to 3rd. All right, there we go. Jumped up to 3rd. There you go. That's Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, maybe Cooper Flag if he plummets. Who knows? But on that note, those are my final thoughts, my predictions for how this season ultimately ends. I won't make a playoff series prediction yet, although I do like the Rockets' chances if they line up 3-6 with the Clippers. I think they probably take that series in 6 games, maybe 7. With that, though, I want your thoughts, your biggest questions as we're rounding out this regular season for the Houston Rockets. Biggest questions post All-Star break. What are your predictions for the record, for the Western Conference standings, for the playoff picture? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Remember, the best way to help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.